Many AA members claim that one can ignore all the references to God and still work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous as a strong atheist. No matter how much of the AA program one chooses to ignore, the organization itself is based on a philosophy that is not only anti-atheist, but is the type of religious indoctrination that harms its members and society as a whole. An atheist should not support Alcoholics Anonymous because the basic tenets of the program do exactly what atheists are fighting against. AA harms people and our larger societies with irrational religiosity. There was not a molecule of scientific evidence or research involved in the forming of AA. It is based on Bill Wilson's hallucination of God during a hospital stay in which he was going through severe alcohol withdrawal and under the influence of a mixture of hallucinogenic drugs including belladonna, henbane, and mandrake. Wilson's revelation was further fueled by his involvement with the right-wing fundamentalist Christian cult, the Oxford Group, and its belief that one could overcome their problems by giving control of their lives over to that cult's idea of God. The 12 steps are based on a Christian sin and redemption model. The individual has no power. There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. When a member is introduced to the cult of AA, they are told that the steps are suggestions and that no one is required to believe anything. But there are no alternative suggestions offered. The program is set up so that the individual develops a dependence on the group. They are told to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, work the steps, and get a sponsor. These are just suggestions. But if a member does not accept them, they will often be subjected to the hostility, ostracism, and disdain that is typical of the way that religious cults treat members who do not do things the way that the group thinks they ought to. AA advertises itself as a support group that exists to help others overcome alcoholism. Once inside the group, the newcomer learns that he or she must do certain rituals like go to meetings and pray to a higher power, or they will relapse and start drinking again. They are told that jails, institutions, and death are the only possible outcomes for those who leave the group. Consider that most of the new AA members are vulnerable members of society. They have legal problems, health problems, financial problems, and mental illness. It's particularly common among alcohol abusers. Some studies say as much as 70% of them are dual diagnosed. That means they also have a mental illness. AA is a cult that preys on the vulnerable. The co-founder of AA, Dr. Bob Smith, who was perhaps the more repugnant of the two, wanted AA to be a male-only organization. Dr. Bob believed that women who drank too much were surely sinful by nature and not worth an effort to save. Bill's need for women to join the organization so that he could exploit them sexually overrode Dr. Bob's petty, ignorant bigotry. Dr. Charlotte Castle, in her book Many Roads, One Journey, points out the many ways in which AA is particularly harmful to women. The basic text of AA, called Alcoholics Anonymous, is commonly referred to as the Big Book, and it has not been updated since its original publication in 1939. This vile and offensive religious propaganda is so precious to AA that they have not seen fit to change one punctuation mark in 67 years. The personal stories, introductions, and some of the footnotes have been changed, but the part of the book that describes the program remains as it was originally published. The early AAers assumed that the alcoholic was male. The 8th chapter in the Big Book is called Two Wives. This is how the women who were married to alcoholic men were expected to behave in accordance with the AA doctrine. The chapter states, quote, "As wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, we would like you to feel that we understand perhaps as few can," end quote. So it appears to be from the point of view of a woman who is married to an alcoholic. The chapter goes on to describe the husband arriving home drunk. Quote, "They struck the children, kicked out the door panels, smashed treasured crockery, and ripped the keys out of pianos. In the midst of the pandemonium, they may have rushed out, threatening to live with the other woman forever," end quote. What would good common sense to one who has to go through such abuse on a regular basis be? According to AA, quote, "Try not to condemn your alcoholic husband, no matter what he says or does. He is just another very sick, unreasonable person. Treat him when you can as though he had pneumonia. When he angers you, remember that he is very ill," end quote. As a side note, this chapter, it was later revealed, was not written by the wife of an alcoholic. It was written by Bill Wilson speaking for the wives of alcoholics. He made sure that he admonished those women who thought they might not need to convert to Bill's religion. Quote, "We thought on the whole we were pretty good women, capable of being nicer to if our husbands stopped drinking. But it was a silly idea to think we were too good to need God. Now we try to put spiritual principles to work in every department of our lives." So the women in AA who were the victims of abuse, and there are plenty, are getting the message that they should shut up and tolerate abuse, and of course rely on God to solve their problems, not to mention find your part in it. Female alcoholics are more likely to have been a victim of sexual or physical abuse. Female alcoholics are more likely to develop related health problems. Female alcoholics are more likely to commit suicide. What does AA have to say about special concerns for women? Evidently, AA doesn't care because the religious dogma is more important than the well-being of their members. Alcoholics Anonymous is a cult that is obsessed with death, a cult of necrophilia as it has been observed. In his second book, The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, Bill Wilson warns that, quote, "Unless each AA member follows to the best of his ability our suggested 12 steps to recovery, he almost certainly signs his own death warrant. His drunkenness and dissolution are not penalties inflicted by people in authority. They are the result from his personal disobedience to spiritual principles," end quote. Or how about this, quote, "The God of intellect displaced the God of our fathers. But again, John Barleycorn had other ideas. We who had won so handsomely in a walk turned into all-time losers. We saw that we had to reconsider or die," end quote. Yep, it means exactly what it appears to mean, and no amount of context will change it. Bill hands out the death sentence to anyone who would dare to disagree with his spiritual principles. Sure, one could ignore these, and one could ignore the rest of the AA literature because all of it is just as bad as the quotes I read. One can ignore all of the explicit anti-atheist sentiment. One could ignore all the stupid things that people say in AA meetings. One can ignore the people who have been told to stop taking their medications and rely on the power of God and AA. One could ignore the fact that AA has no success rate, and some studies show it to be worse than no treatment at all. One could ignore the breach of separation of church and state when people are court-ordered to attend the religious meetings of AA. One can ignore the exploitation of vulnerable people that AA practices. One could ignore the vapid slogans and endless boring drunkalogues. One can ignore the fundamentalist Christian origins of the cult. One could ignore the unhealthy dependence on meetings that many members develop. One can ignore the anti-science, anti-intellectual, anti-individual, anti-progress attitude that AA espouses. Okay, take what you want and leave the rest. What I'd like to know is, after ignoring all the offensive crap, what the fuck is left?